Hey, what's going on everybody? Leo Invest here, back with another trade video, and in this video I'm going to be recapping these gold shorts that I took on 3 a.m. on Friday, July 25th. And the reason why I feel like this is a very important recap for many of you watching this video is because we'll be covering a couple different topics. First of all, we'll be covering a little bit about time frame alignment and how I managed to align this gold trade utilizing the 5-minute and hourly alignment, as well as some change in state of delivery and breaker block continuation trades. And this trade is very nice because typically with most of my recap videos, most of you see that I do like to trade off of the candle 2 closure prior to the candle 3 open. But in this example, I actually did take a later entry off of the candle 3 confirmation of a higher time frame area of confluence. So we'll get into it right now by utilizing the hourly time frame on gold. And first and foremost here, what do we see happened with gold that made me interested in some potential shorts? Well, up at around these Tuesday highs here, we'd seen that we had this accumulation with a small bearish trend downward. And with gold, what did we see? Well, this pre-Tuesday accumulation, we had a very aggressive bullish move starting all the way from that Friday of last week. And then we had this bearish leg down, retracing into some internal range liquidity down at these lows around 3395, and then continuing this move lower. And as we approached this draw on liquidity down at around 2 a.m., what did we see happen? Well, we were met with an expansion, retracement, expansion, a retracement, and then an accumulation once again. And so what I was watching to see, well, where did we see this external range liquidity lie? Well, this external range liquidity lied at this 2 a.m. low from last Friday, which was an area I was waiting to see market retest. And so with gold in a current very aggressive bearish trend, I was anticipating this retracement to be a retracement and accumulation prior to a delivery lower into this draw on liquidity at around 3336.5. And so on this hourly here, what was I waiting to see? Well, I wanted to see some type of confirmation of a 2 a.m. candle sweep with the 3 a.m. hourly prior to then entering a short position targeting this draw on liquidity down at those Friday lows. So let's now go into the 5-minute time frame and see how I actually broke down this trade and this trade entry on the 5-minute. Here we see the 2 o'clock candle open, which I'll actually mark out here. What do we see on the 5-minute? Well, there's a couple different things to note. First and foremost, we see that we are still in a bearish trend. It's not a heavy mover. It's a relatively slow move that's occurring during this Asia session with a small displacement lower. And then around this 2 o'clock candle, what do we see happen here? Well, once again, we see a continued accumulation form as we are now bounding between a very tight range on gold. And so what I wanted to see was to see some type of a manipulation of this 2 o'clock high with this 3 o'clock candle open. And here with this red dotted line is the open of our 3 a.m. candle. And so typically when I like to trade, or if I'm looking for a short or a long setup, I like to see the PO3 in action prior to entering a trade off of a change in state of delivery or a higher time frame sweep. And in this example here, we had this bearish leg that had formed, followed by this micro accumulation within this very tight range. And so now what I wanted to see was a potential sweep of the 2 a.m. hourly candle high, because once again, we are aligning timeframes with the 5-minute and the hourly. And so I wanted to see a manipulation outside of this accumulation being this 2 a.m. high. Because now what this tells me as a trader is if we manipulate this 2 a.m. high on the 3 o'clock candle open, we are now getting an hourly manipulation outside of an accumulation. And so as the PO3 says, AMD, accumulation, manipulation, and distribution. So if I wanted to see gold truly hit my draw on liquidity down at around 3337, I needed to see a sweep of the 2 o'clock candle high with the 3 a.m. candle prior to then looking for some reversal sequence, like a change in state of delivery or a breaker block, so on and so forth. So now let's break it down to see how I actually took this 5-minute entry on gold. And here we see with this 2 a.m. candle high, we had this 3 a.m. candle open. And what does this 3 a.m. candle do? Well, I'm just going to play out a couple here because I was waiting for this manipulation. And here we see what actually occurred on gold here. Well, the 3 o'clock candle manipulated the 2 a.m. high. And so what does this tell me now as a trader? Well, if we are following AMD, I wanted to see a accumulation occur, a manipulation, which occurred here at this 2 a.m. high, and I'll mark this in a red box to make it a little bit easier for you guys to understand. We see this manipulation occur at this 3 a.m. candle open being an hourly manipulation. So now what am I looking for after seeing this manipulation, after this accumulation? Well, as the AMD states, once you see an accumulation and a manipulation occur, you want to see some type of confirmation in order to see a continued move, aka the distribution. And so what do we see with this 3 candle undisrupted move prior to this sweep of the 2 a.m. high? Well, this low of the candle body now becomes our bearish change in state of delivery, which I'll mark here as our SIST. So now what am I looking to see with this specific trade? Well, if I want to be confirmed just off of a change in state of delivery, I want to see a candle body closure below this change in state of delivery. But there's also one thing to note here. What else do we see occur on this time frame that gives me interest in looking for these shorts? Well, this bearish 5-minute candle right here actually acts as a 5-minute breaker block. So we'll mark this out as well, and we'll tag this as our breaker block here. And so now what am I looking for? Well, we have both this 5-minute breaker block, we now have a bearish change in state of delivery, and we have manipulated the 2 a.m. high during the 3 a.m. candle hourly. So now we have multiple layers of confluence here, where we have created this accumulation, manipulated the high of this accumulation, and now with a closure below this change in state of delivery and this breaker block, this will signal me into a C2U short on gold. So now let's see what happens on the following candlesticks to see if we actually get confirmed in this entry. And here we see we approach this change in state of delivery, find our way into this bearish breaker block, but let's see what happens on the following 5-minute. And here we are. We were officially confirmed and tagged into this trade because we have now closed below this change in state of delivery, as well as this 5-minute bearish breaker block with a closure below. And so with a typical C2U entry, what I would go for if I was trading during this candle 2 period, which would be this candle right here, what would I be looking to trade? Well, I would be looking to trade the candle body closure below the breaker and the change in state of delivery. So my entry would be upon the candle closure with a market order, with my stop just above the breaker high, targeting a 2R on this position. And so for a classic C2 entry, this would be the short setup that I would be looking to take here. But here's the thing. In a typical candle 2, this would be a great C2U short yielding a 2R, but in this example, I actually did end up missing my entry upon this breaker and this change in state of delivery closure. And so what do we see happen, which then allowed me to take a continuation entry in this trade? And we'll just play this out here. I'll play out a couple candles so you guys can get more of an idea of what I was looking for. Here we see what happened. Well, we retraced into a point of interest being this 5-minute breaker block here. And so what am I now looking for a potential short setup? Well, I want to see whether or not we form a new candle swing prior to an expansion lower. Because as you guys know, when we are talking about trades, we want to see after an accumulation phase, we see this accumulation, a manipulation, and a distribution. But typically when you get confirmed in a distribution, and this example being the closure below this change in state of delivery and this breaker block, you can see a retracement that forms the new candle wick prior to then expanding lower. And so this period right here where we retraced into this 5-minute breaker block as well as nearly that change in state of delivery, this now becomes the wick of our new higher time frame candle. And I'm going to activate the T-Trades Fractal model to give you guys better insight as to what I am looking at here. And here we see this short signature form on candle 2, and then we retrace into this breaker block. And so this now becomes the wick of the move that we are anticipating lower. And so now this becomes an internal change in state of delivery once again. And so what I want to see in order to be tagged into this entry is a 5-minute candle body closure below this move, aka this internal change in state of delivery, in order to confirm a move lower. And so now we'll look to see whether or not we get this closure confirmation, which will tag me into this trade. And here we see the fractal model just printed our equilibrium. And so we do not want to see a closure above the change in state of this breaker, because then we could anticipate a move higher. And so as long as this swing point is respected, aka this 345 5-minute candle high, this will become the high for our short setup. And so here we see we get tagged in with a closure confirmation below this 5-minute change in state of delivery, which now signals me a short entry, once again, a market order. Now, where would my stop be? Well, as I mentioned with the previous example, if I were to enter off of a traditional C2U entry, I would take a market order on the closure with my stop just above this breaker, targeting a 2R and or a draw on liquidity, which would be those lows that I talked about at the beginning of this video. So with the C2U, this would be a traditional entry for myself here, where I would be targeting this 2R down here and or this draw on liquidity all the way at these lows, which would be about a 4R trade. But in this trade, as I mentioned, I missed my market order entry here and then entered on the closure confirmation of this high within that POI. And so once we got this closure below here, this now signaled me into a position with my stop loss, which I'll just put this here, with my stop loss being at this protected high, which is right here, this 345 protected high. And I'll mark this as well in a circle tool just to make this a lot easier for you guys to follow along. So here is the protected high with this red circle. And so I do not want to see market retrace above this protected high, or this could be an invalidation of this trade. And then what was I looking for on these gold shorts? Well, I was looking to see my draw on liquidity while taking some partials out at 2R. So 2R here would be where I'm looking to take my partials, and we'll just mark this out to keep it easy to follow with a plus 2R and mark this as our partial, as well as my final TP being down at this draw on liquidity. So here we are here. This now becomes our plus 2R partial, which would also be my area for a break-even stop. And then I want to target this low here of this draw on liquidity, which was my hourly swing low at 337.1. So we'll mark out this trade and then put my stop loss at the protected high here. And let's now play out this trade to see whether or not this short setup works in our favor. And so let's actually zoom this out a little bit to make this a little easier for you all to follow. And so let's see what happens now in this trade. Here we see we get a closure below, we retrace, we were in drawdown just for about a second there. We get a aggressive bearish closure lower, which now gives me faith of this trade setup working in our favor. We're going to play out our next candlestick here where we now are below our 2R. And so this would have been a partial. And so because typically if you're in with a couple micros or a couple minis, this is where I would take around 50% of my position and move my stop now to break even. So this is now a risk-free trade where I have now secured profits. And so no matter what happens, I end this trade green. But as I mentioned, we are looking for the bigger picture, aka this large draw on liquidity, which is where I am targeting in order to allow this trade to hit a full 7R. So let's keep playing this out now and see what happens with market. What we see here, we retrace into this 2R partial, we get more closures below, we protect the previous EQ of that candle. And so this now becomes another internal change in state of delivery. So if we see a closure below this change in state of delivery for this candle 4, this can now reconfirm our short signature, which we now get a confirmation below. So for those of you that have missed the C2 or the C3 entry, you could now enter off of here with your protected high as your stop, and then targeting this draw on liquidity, which still aligns with our 2R profit. And let's keep playing this out now and see what happens. We get confirmed, we retrace the internal change in state of delivery. No stop out has occurred. And then let's just see what happens here on gold, right? This is a bit of a longer trade here, but we'll see whether or not we actually end up hitting that draw on liquidity at these lows. So here we see we are retracing lower and lower. We are still respecting those previous highs until finally we get tagged out at around 8:40 a.m. And so this trade, I did end up taking most of my position out at this 2R with my partial, moving my stop to break even, and then looked for a reconfirmation lower where we had a slow grind down from that 4 o'clock window up until 8 o'clock, where my final mini was sold at a nice 6.9R. And so this was overall a very good A+ trade setup by utilizing the higher time frame analysis in order to signal me into an aligning time frame, aka this 5-minute entry. And so just to quickly go over it, for those of you that just like the summaries at the end of my videos, what did we see happen? Well, the hourly time frame was basically looking for a draw on liquidity to hit, and that draw on liquidity became these lows here, as well as it gave us no signal of a bullish movement, but instead a retrace during a bearish trend prior to a delivery lower. We then saw a PO3, aka AMD, accumulation, manipulation, and distribution, where we saw this accumulation occur. We saw the 3M manipulate this accumulation high, which also was an hourly higher time frame sweep. Then we saw a change in state of delivery and a closure below this breaker block, where you could have taken an entry, a market entry on the closure of below both the change in state and this breaker, whereas we took the closure of this internal change in state of delivery after the retrace of this POI, aka this 5-minute breaker block, and then we now took that trade with our partials at 2R, targeting our final draw on liquidity at this hourly low here at 337.10. And so this confirmed an A+ short setup on gold that I did take on Friday. This was a very nice trade as well because it was very hands-off for me after we had gotten this confirmation of this retest of this POI. And this is why I felt like this was a very important video for all of you out there trying to better grasp concepts like change in state of deliveries, breaker block entries, as well as continuations with these C1 through C4 candles. And for those of you, again, candle C1 through C4 basically just stands for candle 1, candle 2, candle 3, and candle 4. If you guys did enjoy this video, please feel free to like and subscribe for more videos like this. And other than that, I will catch you all in the very next video.